Welcome to Connected. I'm your host, Haley Trimboli. And whether you're PhD curious, navigating your program, or you're maybe wondering what your fellow graduates are up to, this podcast is your go-to for inspiring stories, actionable insights, and meaningful connections within the PhD community. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Patricia Grabarek, an IO psychologist, workplace wellness expert, and someone you'll definitely want to follow. She earned her PhD in industrial organizational psychology from Penn State, where she studied how personality impacts performance in customer service roles. So today, Patricia is the author of Leading for Wellness, co-founder of Workr Beeing, and an internationally recognized thought leader on creating thriving workplaces. With a career spanning consulting, internal leadership, research, practice, Patricia is a trusted advisor to organizations across many industries looking to enhance culture and well-being and leadership capability. Her research-driven insights have earned her features in top-tier media outlets, including Forbes, Fast Company, Times, the Los Angeles Times, and CBS News. So let us go ahead and jump in. Super excited about this conversation today. So Patricia, welcome to Connected. Where does this podcast find you today?
Well, one, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I love talking about grad school, right? It's like such a formative part of our lives. Right now, I'm in my own home. I work remotely most of the time. And you're finding me on a day that's just been busy with lots of back-to-back meetings, and trying to get a bunch of stuff done for, promoting our book. Like that's been my life for several months now.
Yeah, amazing. Yes, can't wait to get into that. So thank you for carving out the time today. And so let's jump in. I'm going to start at the very beginning when we think about grad school, and I would love if you could share a little bit about your relationship to academia and school just in general prior to your decision to pursue a PhD.
Yeah, so I went to undergrad at UCLA, and I kind of knew for a very long time that I wanted to do some sort of higher level education. I was like the nerdy little kid, and people asked what I wanted to do, like what kind of job did I want to have. I always just said PhD. I don't even think I knew what that meant. Um, but I've always wanted to, I loved school. I've always wanted to be a part of the academic circles in some way. At UCLA, I studied psychology. UCLA did not have an IO program, so I ended up getting my doctorate in industrial organizational psychology. And how I kind of found my way there was at UCLA, I was working with health psychologists and studying stress, and its impact on different types of patient populations. And while that work was super interesting to me, I am kind of a big mush, and it was really hard to let go of some of the stories of, patients that were dealing with major illnesses and cancers and things like that. So I started looking at different areas and fields that study stress in a different capacity, and which led me to IO. And that's kind of when I decided I wanted to pursue that a little further and just understand how stress impacts people at work. Because we all are at work way too much, probably. And thinking through like how we can actually make work better for people was kind of what got my interest in the field.
That's so important. And you landed at Penn State. So can you share a little bit around like maybe some of the factors that helped you decide that Penn State was the right place for your doctoral journey?
Yeah. So as I was saying at UCLA, I found out later there were IO psychologists that live in the business school there. But I
Okay.
didn't really have a lot of guidance. So I just kind of looked at rankings and like faculty members at different programs. And because I'd never even taken a course in the field, I only applied to 3 programs, saying like, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If not, then I'm going to keep figuring things out. And I got really lucky because I got into Penn State, which I adored and loved. I decided to go there because there are a few faculty members that were studying things around stress at work. My advisor, Alicia Grandy, was there, and she's like a big emotional labor researcher. So I spent a lot of time working with her on emotional labor and like customer service jobs, as you mentioned in my dissertation, is kind of in our wheelhouse too. So like, um, how do people effectively function in these really high stress and like very interactive environments? Um, so her work interested me, and it was a very highly rated program, so I decided to go kind of and see if that was the right fit, and luckily it was.
Yeah, amazing. So you mentioned like highly rated programs, some faculty. For people who might be considering a PhD in a field like IO Psych, I mean, maybe just any field in general, like what would you say they should be thinking about when maybe evaluating programs beyond just like the ranking, the funding, or if it was sort of those things that you listed out?
Yeah, I think definitely finding it out if somebody is doing research that you're interested in. So you've got somebody that you can be doing research for that is in your wheelhouse or where you think you want to focus. Um, Also, if you're able to visit, which I know a lot of programs have people come visit, that's super important because you can get to understand the student population. Like, I think grad school without a good group of friends from the student population is much harder, right? Than having a support system of people that are going through the same thing with you. So, what I really valued is seeing like the connections between the students and like how much they seem to spend time together. Like I was able to ask them a lot of questions to kind of understand the culture of the program. That was really important to me. So I think it's important to kind of see like, can you see yourself fitting into like that environment? Is the culture going to be conducive to the way that you learn? Some people are more competitive than maybe I am. So maybe that wouldn't such a collaborative environment maybe isn't the best for them, right? So it just kind of depends on what you like and how you like to learn and what you want the support system to look like. So that was very important to me is making sure that I understood the culture. And I think it made a big impact on my overall experience there. And the other thing that Penn State does that was unique for IO programs is they had a practicum, or they still do, where we not only did academic work, but we also were working with clients and actually doing some practical work, which for me was really important because I didn't know if I wanted to go into academia or into practice. I was kind of I was honestly on the fence for most of my time, even at Penn State. But it gave me an opportunity to see both sides. And it also helped me to see like how the research that we do is actually practically applied. So for my field and like particular, having that practical application is really important. So that was pretty cool. And that was another big win for me.
Yeah, yeah, you got to get some hands-on experience, and yeah, through these conversations, I've learned that these PhD programs, I mean, globally, just take on so many different formats. So just understanding before that, like, what do you need as you head into that, and trying and so at this point, or maybe like once you got accepted and into the program, and you knew you were heading that direction, like did you have a clear like hope or sort of idea of like what this PhD might unlock for you professionally or personally? Like it sounded like you were still deciding that through the program, but trying to see like anything you had sort of identified before you got into it that you might have been driving.
Yeah. So I think I wasn't really sure I was going to end up like career wise, right? Academia or practice. But one thing that I knew I really wanted was to have that graduate experience of like really talking through research and ideas. And at the, I, in my brain, college was going to be that, and it's not, right? You're in a big classroom a lot of the, especially the school like UCLA is a huge school. We had some smaller classes, especially as you got more senior, but it was the way you learn is very different than when you go into grad school where you have small classrooms where you're debating ideas, discussing, research and like what maybe was a flaw in a study and how could you do this better or what can we improve or, how did this study build on something else that we've talked about and um those kind of intimate conversations around the concepts and the theories and the findings was what I was looking for. And that's what I really wanted at a grad school. And I started realizing, okay, they only accept 4 people a year. Like it's going to be tiny. It's going to probably be what I want. Um, so I think that was the thing I was the most excited about is to have the opportunity to kind of live in that type of environment for a period of time.
Yeah, yeah, that is amazing. Did you have a cohort that you went through with when you got accepted, or was it still sort of people coming in at different times?
It was a cohort. So yeah, the beginning of the school year, there's 4 of us that start. It kind of varied. Um, if you look at the different cohorts, there's like 3, 5, but usually between 3 and 5 people that would come into the program at a time, and you would be with them through all of your classes. Besides certain electives, but all the core classes, you'd be with them. And you'd be, like your first year, you're in some classes with the people in the cohort right above you, and your second year, you're in classes with the people in the cohort that just came in. So it's a little bit bigger, right? You get to know other folks too, of course, but you do have a little tight knit community.
Yeah, that's so important. I've heard that a lot, how important that was for a lot of people's journey.
Hmm.
So you go from UCLA to Penn State, and you move to snowy Penn State campus for the first time, which I know you shared earlier that it was a big adjustment for you. But outside of the weather, what else surprised you most about the PhD life?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, there was a lot of things just moving from a big city to a small town. Like all of those kinds of adjustments were really unique with the weather, of course, and figuring out how to drive in snow and clean your windshield when it freezes, which I didn't even know that was a thing until I moved there. Um, but in terms of the actual graduate experience, I think one thing I didn't realize, and looking back on it, it's kind of funny to me, is how, like, because it's so small, you kind of have this like really weird relationship with the faculty in the sense that like what they think of you is so important to you, right? Like you get very obsessed with that. And so I think the nice thing about having a good cohort of students with you is that you can actually kind of get to discuss the faculty and like what it's like to work with them. They all have their own quirks, right? Like academia is a weird place. There's definitely some very unique personalities there. And so having a cohort of students that are like learning what it's like to be working with quirky faculty is very, very helpful because you can't like what they think about you and your work becomes so important. You're like very insulated in this really intense environment that if you don't have that, I think it can become almost a problem. Like it's almost like become too fixated on getting the approval of the faculty. Like after you leave, you're like, oh, like that was kind of silly, and now I have different relationships with those faculty, right? Like we're more friends, but at the time, you feel this like strange dynamic where it's your entire focus is on making sure that they think you're doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, you know that they're going to be a huge influence to what you learn and what you're going to do or write about. And yet you still have to like learn who they are and as humans. And so, yeah, that's nice to chat through that with the cohort and be able to flush it out a little bit. Um, and so I'd love to dive into what you research for your dissertation. If you could tell us a little bit about your research generally, like how you landed on the topic of personality, I think personality typologies and performance, and
Mhm.
maybe like some of your discoveries through the work that you did there.
Yeah, I know when you asked me for the title of my dissertation before this, I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's been so long. What's my title?" Um, but when I was in grad school, like I studied a lot of I have always had a lot of interests like in my career in general. I've shifted different topic areas of all, but ultimately my biggest passion has been having, better work experiences for employees, right? So whether that's through um selecting the right people, making sure there's a good fit between employees and the work that they're doing, obviously wellness, focus, stress management, things like that. So while I was in grad school, like if you look at my master's thesis and my dissertation topics, they're super different. Like my master's thesis is all about emotional labor and like how can you help people manage emotions and all of that in the workplace. And then I get to my dissertation and I start talking about personality typologies, what feels like a disconnect, but it's actually not. So what I did here is I had a data set that was accessible to me because we had faculty that did a lot of practical work. My one of my advisors, like he was not my main advisor, but he was on my committee, and someone I worked with very closely. He had a data set of police officers and a bunch of different folks and like their personality assessment and their performance. And one of the things I was curious about is, we talk about certain types of personalities in the field, like, high conscientiousness and low extroversion or those different types of variables. But one thing that hadn't been done yet in my field, at least, was creating like kind of groupings of those variables because you can imagine that if you're high on one thing, if you're high on conscientiousness and you're high on extroversion, that's going to present itself very differently than someone that's high on conscientiousness and low on extroversion, right? So, us looking at these variables as like disparate things doesn't really help us understand, who's really going to thrive in certain environments, who's going to be able to handle difficult emotional situations, who's going to be able to go into the work environment and, really do a good job, not just for the company, but also, in terms of their own well-being. Because if you're not able to do a great job in your role, you tend to, that obviously creates a lot of stress, more work, etc. Um, so what I was doing is really just using that data to play with this idea of personality typologies and figuring out like what are the latent groups of people within that, within the data set, to see if it made a difference in terms of their performance. And we did find, I'm not going to remember off the top of my head at this point, like what types of people were better at different types of performance. But we did see that like certain types of people are much better suited for emotional labor type jobs. Certain types of people are more suited for like really tactical things, more detailed oriented things. And it was the combination of personality variables that really made a difference, not just, the singular variables, the way people used to look at it.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I was curious about the topic itself too. And is this something like when you were finished with it that you were like, okay, great? Or like, did you dive in a little bit deeper even after the research and trying to either disseminate or do more research or continue in that field? Or
So I definitely felt a little burnt out on it when I was done. But interestingly, later in my career, I did work for an assessment company for a period of time. The theory behind how they do their assessments is actually very similar to what I had done in my dissertation. The way they were analyzing data was very different. So I was able to kind of bring in some of the new research and new methodologies that I had learned, because I had a minor in data analysis, and my minor advisor was very, very prominent in, she's not an IO psychologist, she's a statistician and methodologist, and she's super prominent in this like latent class analysis, which is what I was using in helping identify um, groups of people, not by like just combining variables if that makes sense, but like trying to find out what is the thing underneath those variables that creates a type of person. So it was cool to be able to do that kind of in my career later on.
Mhm.
And then, but I didn't go into academia, spoiler alert.
Mhm.
And some of the people on my committee started kind of pulling the threads on that research. And now there's been more research kind of in that, with that type of analysis, to kind of understand personality differently. So it's continued, but,
Mhm.
studying my dissertation, but kind of without me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool. It's like found its way in academia. And then you also got to like bring it into industry and share your perspective, learn other kind of ways of doing that or what other organizations are doing. So it sounds like it's continuing to live on. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So what were some of the pivotal, like the most pivotal skills that you developed during your time as a grad student that you still use in your work today?
Well, that's such a good question. I think so. A couple of things come to mind. The first one, which is a little bit counterintuitive, right? Because you think you're building your expertise, but it's actually being able to communicate that expertise. So we spent, as I mentioned, some of our faculty did practical work too, right? And one of them was always like, you need to practice your elevator pitch. And like literally, sometimes you would get in an elevator with him, just happenstance, and he would actually ask you to describe your dissertation or your thesis or whatever research you're working on before the elevator door opens on the floor. And I was like, it was very stressful,
Yeah.
but I think that was very important. I mean, I feel like I've gotten better at communicating my research and my interests over time, but I think it kind of got me thinking about that way. I think that was a really important one. Obviously, I think just the depth of knowledge in a field is super valuable, right? Because now it's easy to be taken seriously because you know a lot about a certain topic and you're an expert in that space, so you can really speak to it intelligently and have ideas around it that can be very valuable. And it's been something that's obviously been important throughout my career. Um, but then I think being able to really understand research and poke holes in research is another thing that's been very valuable. So, like, knowing where the gaps are, knowing, like, okay, this study says X, but is that something I can take right now and immediately put into practice? Or are there some gaps here that maybe we don't know if that's actually going to work the way this one study says? And obviously, that's important for everything I'm doing in my specific field, but even just in the age of misinformation right now, I think it's kind of nice to have the skill set to just, okay, here's somebody saying something in the medical space. Yeah, I don't know medical research super well, but I can go read the original study and see if there's anything glaring or what does the actual study say versus what did a journalist write about it?
Yeah, yeah. It gives you a lot more confidence in not only speaking to things, but also being able to like understand and share information. I was gonna dig in here on if you thought that like writing during your I just wanted to kind of like touch on the topic of writing, if you felt like this was a skill that you developed because you're an author. Like if this was something that you had always liked doing. I know you write a lot in the PhD program, and I think some folks, I know I certainly didn't realize that how much I would be writing. So I was just curious to get your perspective on like writing in the program and if that was something you felt strong in or sort of developed.
I've always liked writing. I think in grad school you develop a very specific type of writing. Um so the way, as you're publishing papers or writing in academia, it's a very unique way of communicating that is kind of geared towards that audience. So I did write a lot. I enjoyed writing a lot. I think it made writing after grad school easier because I've been writing so much that when I, decided to write a book and do all that, it's like the idea of writing a lot wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't scary because we've done it before. But the way I write now has changed considerably because I'm not publishing in academia very often anymore. Um, and the audience, whether it's in my work or in the book, is very, very different. So I think that's one thing that actually is harder to break than you would expect when you're trying to communicate with people outside of your field.
Yeah, you just like want to say everything, put in like tons of information. Yeah,
And
it's a
using
lot.
words that people don't know. Like you think people know because you've been around that audience all the time and then you say it and everyone's like, "What does that mean?" You're like, "Oh, yeah, that's not like a normal part of language."
Yeah, and then how do I explain that? Or yeah, it's a
Mhm.
learning lesson for yourself, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about, because you were getting some practical experience in your program, you've worked in industry, like how did you navigate that identity, or what was that experience like for you, like while in the program of like researcher, practitioner, and making sense of that?
I think it was massively helpful to keep us grounded and like what you're doing research for a reason, right? I think it's very easy. And there's a lot of fields, unfortunately, in academia where you see academics just kind of going down a path because the theory is moving them this direction, but it doesn't actually have any real practical application. It varies on the field, right? Like if you're studying like astronomy and what have you, like that's going to be the practical application is more about learning, continuing to learn, right? But if you're in a field like ours, or like in business or something like that, I think it's so important to bring it back to like why we're studying it. We're studying it because we want to have an impact on the way organizations run and the way, people function within businesses or whatever the field is within that space. And it's really, really easy. And you see a lot of times academics get very deep into these theories that you take it to a leader at an organization and be like, what on earth am I going to do with this? And there's like no way for me to use it. Um, so I thought it was really helpful to have that practical side in grad school because it kind of kept us a little bit more grounded. And in general, I think a lot of the people that come out of that program tend to do research that has more practical application than some of the more like heavy theory programs. And so you see that what they do is going to be featured in like an HBR because people actually can do something with that work, right? Um, and I think that made a huge impact on the way I think about research and what you do with it.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective because it's not like they're separate. Like I feel like how you framed it is that they're just so interrelated. Like your research is going to fuel the practice, and the practice fuels the research, and it's just managing both or staying grounded in both versus like one or the other. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So looking back, what moments stand out as the most challenging maybe during your PhD journey? And then on the other end of that, like the most fulfilling?
Okay, it's a great question. So most challenging, I think kind of getting back to what I was talking about with the faculty and like understanding how they work. I am great friends with my advisor now, but there were moments when I was in grad school where her style of providing feedback was a little challenging. Once I learned it, I was fine and we were able to navigate together. But um, you realize, I don't think as a student you always realize, like, oh, she's reading 6 theses or dissertations, her students, and then whatever committee she's on, and then she's reading papers from her undergrads and all these different folks. So she's not going to remember everything that she gave you feedback on last time. And maybe when she told you to change something, you come back, she wants you to change it again to something different. Or she didn't like the ad that she made, right? So, like, those moments were very frustrating at first. Is like, why is she making me go back and forth on this one thing that she told me to do? So that was really hard to navigate. I know you know, I think she's not the only faculty that does that, right? It happens a lot. And some students have a hard time with that. Once you figure that out, that it's just a memory thing, you learn some tactics on how to cope with that. And oftentimes what I would do is just keep her comments in. So I would make the edits and
Mhm.
keep the comments and say, I addressed this comment here.
Mm.
And then that helped her be like, okay, so at one point I thought this was a good idea. Now I'm seeing it. I don't like it. And that happens, right? Once you see it in writing, you may change your mind.
Yeah.
Like, actually, we don't need that section, or that's a little too clunky, or what have you. So remembering that they may change their mind because when it's actually created, it doesn't look as good or doesn't sound as good
Mm.
as they thought it
Mhm.
might.
Mhm.
But keeping some of those comments in so that there's some continuity so she could jog her memory about the conversations we had before, I think is really valuable.
Mhm.
So it was a challenge, but
Mhm.
one that you can overcome.
Yeah. Mhm.
Feeling, I mean, as cliche as it might sound, it's just like getting it done, right? Like, I think it's very easy to get sucked into wanting everything to be super, super perfect when you're in grad school. I think it's important to remember that your dissertation does not define you. Most people aren't going to read it or really care that much about it. I mean, this is the first time I've talked about it in years. Um, if you take that forward, if you're going to academia, you're going to have to change it so much to publish it. It's not the same
Mhm. Mhm.
document. So a finished dissertation is better than a perfect dissertation. And
Mhm.
I think when you get to the end and you realize, like, I did this, I did all of this work, provided a contribution to the field. I mean, that's obviously just like massively fulfilling.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of strong opinions on on the dissertation. I remember being like, "No one's gonna read it," to like somebody who's like, "Well, wait, like you don't know," and I don't know. It's just like I'm like, I get it, like, but I think in my mind too, like just making sense of like, let me get through this hurdle, and being able to appreciate the story with your faculty because I think like things happen and being able to like pivot and add suggestions and such for ways of working with folks can feel really intimidating and that there's always like solutions to be found and just really honoring the way that you work and being able to voice that and kind of work collaboratively. So I appreciate that story.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I was gonna
sorry.
say, I do think it is important to figure out how to work best with your advisor. Once I kind of got through that hurdle, with figuring out how she gives feedback, then,
Mhm.
I actually did my dissertation when I was working. So I got an internship in DC. So I was 3 hours away from Penn
Mhm.
State and was working my dissertation while in DC. And because we had kind of built a good relationship over my time at Penn State, I told her bluntly, I was like, I am going to need you to be on my back about this. Like, give me deadlines and hold me
Yeah.
to those deadlines. And then I, was afraid to miss them, right? Because but with other students that maybe had similar paths or they went more into practical spaces and they weren't really on campus at the very end, they asked her not to do that. So she
Mm.
laid off and was like, checked in
Mhm.
very infrequently. So she, once you start the conversation, most faculty want to be flexible to figure out how to work best with you.
Yeah.
And just telling them what works for you can make a big difference.
Yeah, yeah, you gotta voice those things and be able to know that it's is your journey. Like there is a level of like being flexible and agile in academia 100%, but at the end, like it is your journey. And I think that it needs to be it's difficult, but try to make it a little bit easier for yourself in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then you graduate and your career kind of getting to post graduation, like your career has been really multifaceted. You've done consulting, people analytics, teaching, an author of a book now, which is just so amazing. Would be curious to hear like how you've chosen some of these career pivots over the years.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned earlier, I had like a lot of different interests, right? Coming into grad school. And then when I was in grad school, while there was always this kind of underlying theme of helping people thrive at work in some way or another, I liked all the different components of IO. For people that don't know, like, IO includes leadership development and like understanding how leaders work, but it also includes how to hire the right person. It includes like work about training, work about teams and how they function. So there's and people analytics, right? So understanding how to use data and survey information to predict whether people are going to stay on the job or how to make things better for them. So there's so many different components of the field, and I liked most of them. So probably a good problem to have in some ways, but that's why I made so many pivots in my career because I was curious to try something different. So when I first started, I mentioned I had an internship. It was at a consulting firm, and I was there for a few years. I was working with federal agencies and being able to do a lot of different things. It was a small consulting firm, which gives you more flexibility for types of projects. So I was like building competency models. I was building performance review processes and providing training to managers on how to give feedback effectively. I was running analyses on like it's called the FEVS, a Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. So like every federal employee takes the survey and the agencies get their own data and, sometimes they ask for help on like analyzing that and what do we do with this information and how can we, make improvements based on what we learn. So I did a ton of different projects in that role, which was like a great kind of starting point, right? Is like see what's out there, see what I like, and didn't really narrow down too much what I liked. But it was a fun first step. And then from there, just kind of as I felt like I learned everything I could learn in a role, or if there was something lacking from a fit perspective, because as I mentioned, I really care about thriving at work. So if something was not a good fit or maybe a little toxic in the environment, I was ready to move. And I would just find other roles that I thought were interesting. And every time I've applied for jobs, I would apply for a variety of jobs. It's like I would apply to people analytics jobs and talent development jobs and consulting. And so I would just kind of keep my options open, interview at a variety of places, and then see what stuck, what seemed good for me, and what, obviously if they thought I was a good fit too. So I always recommend people just stay open and like just understand what your skill set is and how it can apply in different settings and not pigeonhole yourself to being like, I'm a consultant, so I got to go to a senior consultant, to a whatever consultant, right? And just go up the ladder. There's probably other places your skills can go that could be really interesting.
I so appreciate that. I think especially for those coming out of academia, when you narrow down on such a specific thing that you're like limited in that time of researching one small thing. And when you get out of it, you're like, but I do have these other interests, but what, do I still need to narrow myself? So I think that's a good perspective of like your experience and how that shook out and the opportunities that came in different areas.
Yeah, and I think also like you're mentioning like coming out of academia, like I never really kept that door closed either. As you mentioned, I taught, so I was teaching at USC for a bit. I have a lot of friends that are in academia, so this book kind of came from a partnership with a friend of mine who is in academia. She's a professor at the University of Arizona, and we've done research together and kind of combining our strengths. So I think you can kind of make the journey whatever you want it to be, right? And just if you're really interested in both sides, like don't lose the other side. You can still stay connected. You can teach part-time. You can do research with colleagues that are still in academia and get kind of keep both areas open for yourself.
Yeah, I love this. And I want to just dive in a little bit deeper here. Like, what tips or tricks or strategies do you have for doing this? Because I think it can be challenging of like when you're not fully in academia to like stay up to date or get back in that flow. So would love to hear any like tips or tricks you have.
Well, this is where I think your cohort of friends from grad school is super important, right? Because you're all going to scatter to different places. My co-author is a friend from grad school. She was in the cohort ahead of me. And we just stayed connected and we have similar interests and we work very similarly. So it kind of just meshed perfectly for us where, again, we have different strengths and I can openly talk to her about the things that I'm interested in studying and working through. And, she brings academic lens and like what's going to actually publish in academia versus what's going to be like, what can we do from a practical perspective? And like, how do we want to do both of these things? So I think just keeping your connections really strong in both sides is important. So regardless of which route you take, but you want to be connected to the other one, those connections are really where I think your strengths are. Field, like our conference, the PsyOps Society of IO Psychology, it has both practitioners and academics that attend every year. So that's also a really nice venue for us, at least as a field, because you can continue to go and sit in and listen to academic research and go and listen to like what Google did last year for their manager training or whatever. So you have both. I know that's not the case for every field, but potentially, if you're in practice, maybe you go back to your academic conference every once in a while just to stay connected and like see what the trends are, what people are talking about, what research looks like. Depending on the field, like I pay for memberships to APA, the American Psychological Association, which allows me access to journals for like the key journals in our field, which I also peruse from time to time, which I think is helpful, but I know it takes time. So it's like you have to figure out what you're trying to get out of it and what matters to you. And the time management is obviously a big piece, right? Like I've been very lucky. I've had very flexible jobs in my career, so it's not a big deal to add in little things here and there. But again, that's why I always try to find jobs that are the right fit. So if you find a role that can support you in both, it's great. Like I have that, and a lot of my roles have had that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many ways to stay plugged into academia. And on the other end of that, like, do you have any sort of advice on around like strengths, et cetera, to play up when you're in industry? Like, as somebody who's come, say you have a PhD, you want to fully work inside of industry. Like, are there ways that you might play up some of the skills that you've learned within your program or that you think are helpful when working in industry?
So I think as an academic, when you go into industry, you're bringing research and data knowledge that a lot of people don't have. So if you're able to show people that you can communicate data in an easy to digest and practical way, that is huge. People really appreciate that. They want to understand like how they can make improvements in whatever space that you're in, and being able to make those connections between data, but then like make it easy to understand for them, helps you kind of really drive change in organizations or, whatever area you're in. Like if you're working on a product, like helps people kind of figure out like how can we move and make this better. So I think that's a really big one that a lot of people outside of academia don't have the same strengths in the detailed research steps and data and all of that. I think though, as I was talking about earlier with the elevator speech, that's another one, is like being able to take your skills and really communicate it in a way that people can apply and use and understand, what expertise you're bringing, so that you can be a thought leader in a specific area and have influence, and people would be excited to learn from you versus feeling like, ugh, the academic is talking again. And is this even really meaningful, right? So being able to bridge that gap, I think, is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you've done it in an amazing way, and have been a huge example of that. So just through the work that you're doing. So, and I like double, triple highlighted or underlined over here, like making data easy, because I think in academia it's not always easy to understand. So I think like lesson learned, like think about how to make it easy too. And yeah, so and your book is Leading for Wellness, and I just wanted to like come to this, which has received incredible praise. I read it; it's really fantastic. What is the core of what's the core message that you hope that anyone, whether a leader or employee or student who reads it, is like walking away with?
Well, thank you for bringing the book. I, of course, am obsessed with talking about it right now. It's still so fresh and new and exciting for us. Um, the book, going back to research, we did a bunch of research for the book, but we tried to make it very practical. And what we're hoping people take away from it is the recognition that workplace wellness isn't about programs and benefits and perks and yoga classes or what have you, but it's really about creating environments where employees can come to work, be themselves, do a good job, and then have space to be away from work and take care of their families and themselves and their lives that are outside of the workplace. And one of the key ways that organizations can do that well is through leaders. We learned that leaders really make the biggest impact on an employee's day-to-day experience. So if I wanted someone to just walk away, just like knowing one thing about the book, it's as if you're a leader or if you have any influence in your role as an employee and you like maybe kind of informally lead, how you treat people, how you support them is going to have a huge impact on whether or not they can do a great job in the workplace and thrive outside of work too.
Yeah, amazing. And I just highly recommend it too. I just feel like reading it was so like easy, but like rich in data and like resources and like all that goodness. So like from an academic who's also in industry, like even my perspective, I just like love the experience of how you were able to articulate complex data, what we just talked about, sort of like in a really easy, practical way. So definitely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I would say plug for qualitative research, right? Because that's where you can get some really good stories. And I think in certain fields in academia, we kind of forget about qualitative research, but that's what resonates with people that are not data focused. So we can have all the great numbers behind the scenes, but we've got some stories. And I think that really sticks.
Yeah, I certainly feel too in this like age of AI that qualitative data is going to be even more important. Yeah, cool. Well, I was wondering if you could share like, I mean, maybe it's just the book and I think that is enough, but like any fun things that you're working on or looking forward to in the future, what's something that is exciting you right now?
So, I mean, the book is obviously, like you said, a big one that I'm super excited about. And it's new and feels still like it just came out. So I'm really excited to keep, promoting the message of the book. We've been talking to some organizations, speaking engagements and things that have been really cool. So wanting to see that kind of pull through. But I will say that I don't think I'm done with my writing. So I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm sure that in the next, year or two, we'll start kind of thinking about what our next story message could be and what does that look like. So that would be probably the next exciting thing in addition, like book number 2, hopefully.
Very cool. Well, I cannot wait for that and see kind of what the next evolution is of what you're doing. So super excited. I have 2 final questions that I ask every guest who comes on. And the first one is, what is one book, podcast, or article that every PhD student should read or listen to in addition to Leading for Wellness?
It's actually not quite in any of those things, but when I was in grad school, I don't know if it's still there, PhD comics, is that still a thing? That was like my favorite. Yeah? Okay. Because I felt like it resonated. I feel like it made the experience feel normal. You don't feel completely out of your mind when you see that other people are talking about it. So I think that like to me, that was like a lifesaver. It's like a silly one, but I really felt like it helped me when I was in grad school.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I think like it's like maybe I don't want to read all these other books or do more, I just need something funny. So such a good reminder. And the final question, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice before starting your PhD, what would it be?
Oh, I would say it's a really good question. I think the thing that I see most students struggle with, including myself, is like remembering that you are a person outside of the program too. So like right now, I feel like I talk about work-life balance a lot, right? But there's kind of like a grad school life balance that gets lost. It's like you hang out with the same people from grad school. You're always doing grad school stuff. And sometimes it can be easy to like lose a hobby or something that you're interested in just because you get really busy. So I think when you're going to a program, you probably can't keep every single little thing you've been doing, right? Because it's going to be super busy for you. But like, what are like the 1 or 2 things that you don't want to lose? Like if you were someone that goes to yoga every day, like prioritize that. If that's something that you care about, like pick something that you really want to prioritize, that you want to keep core to your identity, even when you're going through a really busy and difficult period, right? As you're doing all the learning and kind of creating a new identity, what do you want to maintain from your old identity?
Yeah, so important. I really appreciate that one. Thank you so much just for being here. This was such a fun conversation, so insightful. Like, thank you for sharing your journey and your lessons learned along the way. For those like listening who want to follow your work or get your book or check out Workr Beeing, where should they go?
So LinkedIn's a great place to go to find me. It's LinkedIn, and then it's like / my name, Patricia Grabarek. So I post a ton on there, and always provide links to new things that are talking about. And then our book you can find at anywhere you can get your books, right? Barnes & Noble, Amazon, what have you. So I would say, or workrbeeing.com/book, we have links to everything. We have it on Audible and all the different formats. So that would be where to go.
Awesome. And your amazing podcast as well. I think you can find on probably anywhere you get your podcasts.
Yes, Apple, Spotify, all that good stuff.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Sorry, my internet is totally choppy now at the end there. So sorry if it was hard to hear me. Such a fun and insightful conversation with Patricia, from pre-doctoral journey to really thinking about what the culture might be like at the schools that you're applying to and how important that is, to setting some boundaries or working with and collaborating with your advisors and just being really mindful or aware of the ways that you work, and then voicing that in the collaborations that you have in academia, to creating your elevator pitch and being able to communicate that robust data that you are certainly probably diving into a lot in your research, for others to really learn from. And I think she just has certainly done this in an amazing way. And so just so grateful for her time today. And I would love to hear what resonated with you the most. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a message or a comment. Thank you for tuning in to Connected. You can find all of the links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your PhD community. And be sure to follow along on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for more conversations just like this. I will see you next time, and let's stay connected.